everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be repotting the bundle of discounted orchids and the Cattleya dowiana that I got from the eBay seller and did the unboxing of previously, which I will link you to down below. So I did the unboxing last night and I've soaked all of the orchids in a nutrient solution with some seaweed extract and also an antifungal solution, just on the off chance that they have any roots that are still able to absorb anything at all, because that'll give them a little bit of a head start. However, unfortunately, most of them have no roots. So what I did was I've unpotted them all, and I was going to talk you through the repotting of each of them and kind of the thinking behind the repotting in the aims of saving them for each of them. There are a few little surprises, some good, some bad, that I discovered, but rather than just me unpotting them all and saying, here's a rootless orchid, which, you know, they're pretty much all rootless, so that would get old quite quickly. I thought we'll look at them all, repot them all, and see what we can do to save these orchids. Some of them I'm very hopeful for, some of them maybe not so much, but we will have a look and see. So first of all, I just wanted to talk to you about kind of my ideas for a setup for these. So usually what I do with rescue Cattleyas is I just pop them into semi-hydro and I make sure I keep the top of the lacquer beads very moist, and for me this works really well. I don't do anything particularly special. For these orchids though, I am going to try and raise the relative humidity around the orchids a little bit, because at the moment it's 30 degrees in my grow room. We're having kind of a heat wave. These plants don't have roots and they're going to be losing quite a lot of water. So this is maybe slightly different to what I would usually do, but we'll trial it out and see how it goes. I don't really like the spag and bag method, unfortunately, putting sphagnum moss in a bag and sealing your orchid in it, because I've tried it in the past, I've tried it a few times, and I always seem to get a lot of mould and rot setting in because there's no air circulation. You're raising the humidity and then there's no circulating air. So for that reason, I'm not going to be doing that today. It's a very viable method and it works for a lot of people. So I don't want to discourage anyone from trying it out. I just want to kind of say it doesn't really work for me in my environment, so that's why I'm not going to be doing it today. But it's definitely a method that works for a lot of people, so I'm not saying don't do it. I just personally, for some reason, it doesn't work for me. So if we start with the bigger orchid first, which is the Cattleya dowiana, which was kind of the reason for the order in the first place. This is what I received, and you'll remember I unpotted it and kind of was like, oh, this is awful. And it is, it's quite bad. These roots are dead. So I'm going to set it for this one and then we'll get over the fact that most of the roots were dead for the others because they were discounted. But this root is alive, that's very firm, and it's greened up when it's been watered. And this root's alive, this root's alive. So the ones that are coming off the newer growths are all alive, and we do have the start of some little root tips that were starting to come out of the new growth. Now they have all, there's one there, so there's only two that came out of the new growth. One there, oh, and there's another one there, so 3 in total. And they've all blackened at the tips when they've reached the media. Now I think the media that it was in was completely unsuitable, so hopefully this new growth may have a few more roots left in it to put out. If not, that eye does look like it's swelling up quite nicely, so hopefully it'll put out a new growth from that new growth soon. For some reason it's been chopped off. I guess it had a fungal or bacterial infection. It's all nice and dry, and obviously I've been soaking these in an antifungal solution anyway. First things first, I'm going to be spraying the root system with hydrogen peroxide 3%, which will kill any snails or snail eggs that might be living in there and any other little bugs, hopefully. Just let that react for a few minutes. And then we are going to take off all the old dead roots with some pre-sterilised scissors. And you can see that the roots that were coming from the oldest parts of the plant are dead, which is quite often what happens with Cattleyas anyway. They do tend to lose their oldest roots, and the roots that are maybe coming from newer pseudobulbs are a little bit more alive. unfortunately this dowiana hasn't had the best start, which is a real shame, but we do have a few good roots, so I guess I can't complain. And you do kind of get what you pay for quite often with orchids, so if I'd paid sort of £100 or £200 for it, then maybe I would have got a better plant, but obviously if the seller didn't feel that he could get that for it for whatever reason, that would be why I've got it cheaper, but that's fine with me because we have something that's salvageable, and it's the Rosita variety, which I'm really excited about because it's a beautiful kind of semi-peloric variety. Right, so I've taken off all the dead roots, and these ones are actually all alive. This is a little bit dodgy, but it is firm in places. If this had more roots, I would take it off, but since we don't have a lot of roots to begin with, if it's absorbing anything, then you know it's better that I leave it on for the plant. So that is all done. So those are the roots that I took off. I am going to put this one into semi-hydro. It has a decent root, well, it has some decent roots there, so it's better than nothing. What I will do is plant it a little bit lower so that there's a little bit more humidity around the surface, because while semi-hydro implies a constantly moist environment, in my actual grow space I get a very dry top layer, and it's actually too dry for many orchids. So yeah, I think it completely depends on your environment. So I've just switched to a different bowl because I realised you probably couldn't see it very well in the other bowl. But yeah, this is the root system. We've got some good ones left, some questionable ones, but they're still firm, so I'm leaving them on. Okay, so I have pre-soaked my leca, and I'm gonna tuck that under there. So I'm happy with that positioning. The newest growth is positioned towards the front. And I am going to need to stake this one because it's not got very many roots. And I mentioned that leca with semi-hydro can be a little bit dry in my environment. And the way that I try to mitigate this is by placing a layer of smaller leca beads at the top of the media. Now the smaller beads wick water more efficiently, and the larger beads will create more air pockets. So having the smaller beads placed towards the top gives you a slight amount more control over the level of moisture. So I do soak my leca overnight and do several washes before using it for orchids because it can be quite dusty. And for me, I don't have any pH issues with leca, but I know some people do. So it's always worth, if you're trying out this method, checking the pH of your leca before you keep orchids in it long term. Because if it's giving you a very high pH, it means you're going to constantly have to be pHing down to quite a high degree, which is fine, but it's just worth knowing that you have to do that. This one has a pH of about 7.5, so that's fine. That's, you know, it's slightly alkaline, but I pH down anyway, so I can pH accordingly now that I'm aware of that. And I've been growing my Cattleyas in semi-hydro with leca or self-watering with leca for over a year now, and in terms of the other orchids I've been keeping in this way, probably close to 2 years. I started off switching over my Phalaenopsis gradually after I was reading about it, and then kind of gradually switched all the rest of my orchids over and ran into some issues with some types of orchids. But Cattleyas I've kept in there because they seem to really like it, in my environment at least. Different obviously for everyone with everyone's environments. It's very difficult to know until you try something whether it's going to work or not. I think I'm probably gonna actually make a separate video talking about semi-hydro, because otherwise I'm gonna take up all of this video chatting about it. Okay, so that is my Cattleya dowiana all potted up, and I'm hoping it will make a swift recovery. So some species Cattleyas can be a little bit more fussy, so we'll have to monitor this one carefully, particularly with the semi-hydro setup that I put it into, because it can be a little bit dry for new root growth. So we're going to need to be keeping a careful eye on the new roots as they emerge, and I'll be spraying down the top of the leca if I do notice any problems. And this is another reason I've put it into a clear pot. So although clear pots you're more likely to get algae issues, the algae issues will usually only be in the bottom bit of the pot that has the water reservoir. You don't usually get any algae appearing up further higher. So this way I can monitor the root growth, and if I'm not happy I can pull it out. My orchids don't usually go through an adaptation period with semi-hydro, like the old roots are usually fine, but obviously this one doesn't have great old roots anyway, so we need to be really careful that those new root tips that are emerging are kept in the absolute best possible conditions that they can be. Pop the tag in there, and that is that one done. One down, only like 14 more to go. So the next one, I'll probably do them in descending order. So the next one is going to be the Dendrobium starsheen botanic fireworks. So spray that down with hydrogen peroxide. So the roots towards the back are all dead, and the rest of them don't look great, but they are firm, so I'm going to leave them attached. It does seem to have plumped up a little bit from the overnight soak in the nutrient and antifungal solution. And got a couple of eyes there. That one looks like the most promising, but we also have one there where the new growths will emerge from. So again, this one's going to go into semi-hydro. I've got a very similar hybrid, which is the Dendrobium waiomao, doing very well in semi-hydro. Probably just going to put this into a cup for now, just so I can monitor the root growth. Okay, so I am actually disinfecting this bowl in between each orchid. Possibly not necessary for the next few because they're in such a bad state. And I'm not really going to have to cut much off, I think, for some of them. But we will maintain the highest standard that we can. So I'm going to keep cleaning everything between each orchid. So the next orchid is this sorry little guy. So this one is Toshie Aoki crossed with LC Colour Guard. I'll see if I can find a photo to put up. So it's a reasonable size orchid. This is the latest growth, which is just completely flopped over. It looks like it's been damaged at some point. Let's just peel back the sheath here so we can have a better look. I have had this happen before to very dehydrated canes, and they do eventually kind of fix themselves. Now some of these spots were looking a little bit wet when I got it, so I've obviously immersed the whole plant in an antifungal solution overnight, and they do seem to have dried out. I'm not sure if it's just that it had got damp in transport. It's not been in transport very long though. So I'm seeing something a little bit positive here. This new growth has only produced one root so far, which the tip has blackened, so that's not growing anymore, but it has the potential to grow more than one root per new growth. Oh, so there's another one, so it's produced two, that one's dead. But there's a possibility that this new growth here will put out a few more new roots because it looks like it's not that long matured. In addition to that, we have quite a nice looking eye there. So that's hopeful. And it does look like it started swelling, so hopefully that'll push out a new growth fairly soon. So this one, there's a chance with, even though it looks awful, kind of got to look at the signs that the plant is giving you, and this says that that is primed for producing a new growth and potentially some new roots soon. So we might get lucky with that one. It would be better if it was already producing a new growth, but these orchids cost £30 for 14, so less than £3 each, probably around £2.50 each. For that, probably couldn't expect much more really, could we? So all these roots are dead, so we're just going to take them off. The reason for that is they will just rot in the pot, and that's not going to do anyone any good. If there was the slightest chance that a few of them were still alive, just not looking great, I would 100% leave them on, but they were completely squishy and dead. So, and that one is dead as well. That's one of the new ones, which is a shame. I think they've just been really neglected, unfortunately. They probably were divided and then neglected a bit. So I'm going to spritz that one down with hydrogen peroxide again. I'm doing this for all of them, but I might not film the peroxide spritz for all of them, but just bear in mind I am doing it. So after the hydrogen peroxide spritz, just leave that to fizz for 10 minutes. That's to give the reaction enough time to occur, which is the loss of an oxygen. So instead of the chemical formula being H2O2, it reacts and then just turns into H2O or water. So after that, there's no need to rinse the peroxide off or anything. Okay, and I think this one is just going to go into a cup with a little bit of leca at the bottom. Try and keep the humidity nice and high, but still have enough airflow. The leca, it will eventually be going into semi-hydro, so yeah, hopefully that'll be okay for it. And that should keep it nice and moist without actually causing any damp issues. What I will do is I will just spritz occasionally that one good root that we've got in there. And when it starts putting out new roots and they're a little bit longer, I'll probably pot it up. But for now, I think it's best in this sort of environment with a little bit extra humidity for now. And to hold that in place, I've literally just put a little clip over the rhizome, which goes down in. It's just a little plastic grip. So we'll try and do something else positive next. So this is the LC Jungle Eyes, and I don't know what that is. Is it a root? Is it a growth? I think it's a root. I think it's a weird purple tinted root that's going upwards. I don't know. Didn't go green at all. I have absolutely no idea. I think it's a really weird root, I think. If they're not exposed to light, they will stay kind of whitish, but you would think it would have been exposed to light. So those are dead. Take them off. Not doing anything for the plant at all. And that one is again just going to sit on top of the leca in that little cup. I'll fill the reservoir up to about here. So we've got constant humidity plus airflow. Hopefully it'll put new roots down into the leca and then we can repot it when it does. Next we're going to go for the Encyclia vitellina, which I was kind of not holding much hope for until I took it out of the pot and found this. Amazing, right? So we've got a new growth and new roots. So we're going to take all of these old dead ones off and just concentrate on getting these ones down into the media. Now, most of my Encyclias do really well in semi-hydro in leca. One of them, the Encyclia cordigera, did not because the dry top layer was just too dry for those new roots. However, my Encyclia alata and Encyclia mariae crossed with citrina that I have do amazingly in semi-hydro. So I'm going to put this one in to start with and see how it goes. It's just trial and error, really. Spritz that down with hydrogen peroxide in case there are any snail eggs at all in here that are ready to nibble off those little root tips. I doubt it. Now when roots first emerge, they don't actually have a very high absorbency, which is why this hasn't plumped up yet. But as they get further into the media and grow in length, they actually change their structure slightly, so they become more absorbent. So yeah, that is a pleasant surprise, isn't it? I'm really happy with that because it's a beautiful orchid. Next, we're going to do one that doesn't look so bad, but it's not got any particularly good roots that I can see, which is Laelia harpophylla crossed with Cattleya leopoldii. So I'll take off all the squishy ones. Okay, so we didn't have any good roots there, and the rhizome does not look amazing. It all seems to be quite dried up though. There's nothing really squishy in there. I think obviously it's a bit wet where I've soaked it with antifungal solution overnight, but hopefully that antifungal solution will do the trick. And I'm just going to apply some cinnamon, I think, to it. This rather rubbish looking chopped cane is not great. Gonna take the top of that off and see if we have anything decent there. Okay, we don't really have anything decent in there, but it is holding those two pseudobulbs together, and I think without it, each of them on their own will struggle. I think it's probably doing something. As I'm getting closer down, you can see it's getting a little bit paler, so I'm just going to treat it with cinnamon. It's not an ideal situation. I'll have to monitor that quite carefully. So, just got some so I've treated it with hydrogen peroxide, which will kill bacteria and fungi to some extent. It's not quite as good as some agents, but then again, it's not as invasive as some agents. I'm just gonna apply cinnamon quite liberally to all of these areas. When I was looking at it before I'd soaked it, it did all look quite dry, but obviously I've soaked it now in an antifungal. That'll do some good anyway. But just to be on the safe side, all of that is going to be coated in cinnamon. Cinnamon is a desiccant, but we don't exactly have any roots here to desiccate, so I will probably just have to keep a very close eye on this one. And for now, for the next few days, I'm just going to keep that in a plastic cup like that, to make sure that it all stays nice and dry, and to monitor that kind of blackness at the rhizome, because the last thing we want to do if there is the start of a bacterial infection is to add water in a nice warm humid environment, because all we're going to get then is lots of multiplying bacteria in a perfect environment for them. So I can try and get rid of any if there are any, or if it's fungal, again the same applies. Fungal cells like really nice warm environments. Okay, so what should we do next? Let's do something a bit sad, and then we can go on to happier things. The Brassia rex waiomao, spotless. These are all dead. So the antifungal that I did soak them in overnight is the same one that I used to treat my fusarium on my Miltonia sunset. So it's a systemic antifungal. if any was absorbed at all, it'll deal with any fungal spores or cells that are in the system. I don't know if any was absorbed at all by the ones with absolutely no roots, but hey, topically it'll still work. It might still be absorbed to some extent. Not quite as well as if it had roots to deliver it throughout the plant, but yeah. So hydrogen peroxide. So for the orchids that I've repotted so far, I have been using leca pellets to kind of imitate semi-hydro a little bit, or keep a little reservoir at the bottom, but to keep the humidity nice and high, I've planted them nice and low down in the pots. So hopefully that'll reduce the amount of water that they're losing and encourage a bit of new root growth. More so in that it's going to reduce the water that they're losing, and then they'll be able to divert that energy a little bit better to root growth than actually encouraging root growth. But also any roots that do emerge, the humidity will be nice and high, so there's less chance of them hitting the media and drying out, as we saw with some of the root tips that had emerged in the previous seller's care. Now for this one, I am going to be putting it into a little cup with a little bit of damp sphagnum moss at the bottom. I'm just going to literally sit it on there, and this is because it's a Brassia, so it's in the Oncidium Alliance, and all of my Oncidiums, or the majority of my Oncidiums, didn't really get on very well with semi-hydro, and I got a lot of problems with the root tips dying off when they came out of the plant and touch the media because of the dry top layer. Now this would be mitigated in this kind of setup because I'll have a nice humid kind of environment there, so the top layer of leca on the others shouldn't get dry like it would when the leca's right at the top of the pot. But just because in my environment Oncidium seems to do better in sphagnum moss mixes, I'm gonna do this little interpretation of a spag and bag method with a little bit more airflow, and we will see what happens. I don't have a lot of hope for this plant, but it might just put out a new growth, you never know. And this is probably the closest that I'll be doing to replicating the spag and bag method, because for me in my environment that's just too humid and too damp, and it promotes rot and fungal issues and molds. So I won't be doing that, but this is kind of my alternative method. So it'll still keep a little more airflow around the top, but it will create a nice little humid microenvironment within the glass. I think we will do this little Odontoglossum next. So this is the Odontoglossum crinitum. Now, I was making fun of this yesterday because I was like, why did the seller even bother sending me this? This is really pathetic. Basically a blade of grass. But then I unpotted it, and we actually have new growth starting there, which is kind of amazing. I don't actually have any Odontoglossums. I've got Miltoniopsis, I've got cooler growers like Restrepias, Masdevallias, but I don't have any Odontoglossums. I kind of understand the principles of their care. Being cloud forest growers, they're going to like it very cool and moist, even compared to Miltoniopsis, which are more cool to intermediate growers. I believe the Odontoglossums like it very cool, and we are in the middle of a heat wave at the moment where it's kind of averaging 30 degrees Celsius, so we'll see how this goes. I'm not sure at what stage the new growths on these actually put out roots. Some, like Miltoniopsis and Oncidiums, can put out roots quite early from quite small new growths, and some they kind of wait until they're more mature. So I'm not sure, I'm going to have to look that up with Odontoglossums. But yeah, it's not quite as bad as we first suspected. It's the remnants of an old pseudobulb there. So they've obviously pulled the back bulb off a rotting pseudobulb in a vague attempt to propagate the plant, I guess, which is what I've got here. But yeah. We are just gonna snip the rhizome right off here, I think. This is gonna just sit, as with the Brassia, in a little cup with some sphagnum moss at the bottom. Having had a little think about it, it's gonna go into an even smaller cup with some sphagnum at the bottom, because there's no point keeping it in a huge pot. Literally just going to put it like that and we will see what happens. And I will be keeping that sphagnum moist, but not soggy, so I'm just gonna probably put it on a little saucer and just make sure that it's always kind of moist to create some humidity, but I'll make sure it's not soggy because at the moment these plants are going to be very susceptible to rot and bacterial and fungal infections. So usually I wouldn't do this, but I think I might make a little community pot with this Laelia anceps, whatever that says, disciplimata, I'm not sure. So I think I'm just gonna spritz that down with hydrogen peroxide again. And I have been sterilising my scissors in between these. But these guys I think are actually going to share a pot. Because I am not holding a lot of hope for this little Laelia. So yeah, I think it's just going to go into that little pot too. Make a little community nursery pot. Odontoglossums and Laelias require very different care, but it's fine. When they get to this stage of illness, weakness, all kind of orchids need a very pampered environment with high humidity. So it's, you know, you want to keep them from losing moisture as much as physically possible. And the majority of these that don't have any roots will not be getting any fertiliser at all until we've got some decent roots nice and far down into the media. There's no point fertilising an orchid until it's capable of taking up that fertiliser. Otherwise what you end up with is fertiliser accumulating in the pot and roots that do emerge then burning because they've hit the accumulated fertiliser. Okay, so on to the next orchid. We're getting through these. This might be slow going, but we are getting through them, and I'm really sorry if this is a little bit repetitive, but this will be a nice little introduction video to them, and then we can kind of follow on. This is Cattleya Classic Autumn Melody. Yeah. Okay, so yesterday I was quite negative about this. Well, not negative, but you know, I was thinking that many of these wouldn't survive, but actually I think on more than half of them we've got a good chance, and I've paid around £2.50 per little rescue orchid, so that's again not too bad. So what do I do with you? Yeah, I'm just going to put that little Cattleya and the Laelia in their own separate little sphagnum pot. And then I've got the Odontoglossum on its own in another little pot there. Okay, this next one looks much more promising. So this one is the Cattleya jenmanii, rubra. And got quite a nice new growth on that, which is a decent size. So I'd say this is a much better orchid. And we just want to take all these sheaths off and have a little look, make sure no pests are hiding under there, no infections or anything. And this sheath is quite dried, so I'm going to try and take it off. Okay, so while that one at the moment might not necessarily look like a very promising prospect in that it's not got any roots, the fact that it's got that new growth which looks like it's kind of nearing maturity and hopefully should put out some roots soon, and also the fact that the last growth was very large, so it's potentially had enough capacity capacity to store quite a lot of nutrients to push that new growth out. I'm pretty hopeful that this should be absolutely fine and will probably be one of the first to recover. I've probably jinxed it now, but yeah, I'm happy with that one at least. So yeah, there have been quite a few reasonable ones in here. There's definitely some that are going to be quite an ordeal. Speaking of one such orchid, this is the Laelia purpurata var striata. And this one didn't look too bad, but upon closer investigation, removing the sheath of one of the floppy pseudobulbs, I found that the pseudobulb looks like it's got potentially a bacterial or fungal infection there. So we've got two options. We can cut that off, but that is the newest growth. So that's a little bit risky. We can treat it with cinnamon, and I've obviously soaked it in an antifungal solution, so if it is fungal, that may well have already dealt with it, and hopefully stop the infection before it completely wipes out the plant's new growth, because like there's still some connection there. This would have started yellowing if there was absolutely no vascular connection. It could even be that this is just damage. But I think that that's unlikely with the way it's kind of flopping. So if we took it off now, I could take it off just below. It's very difficult to know what that could be, but that's not particularly secure. There's this blackness up here as well. Oh, the whole pseudobulb is very squashy. I think we're going to take that off. So just sterilise my scissors. Okay, so obviously it has been soaking in antifungal solution. I'm just going to take this off here, which will preserve the bottom of the new growth and the eyes and the area where it will produce the root system. Just cut a bit higher to try and investigate further, and you can see it's black all the way through, so it's not mechanical damage, it's an infection. So it's a shame to have to take this leaf off, but I think that that's the best outcome, and it does still have some other leaves to photosynthesize. So I think we're best off just treating this with cinnamon and having just taken that off. I think that's the best thing we could have done in this situation. And this old pseudobulb as well is rather squishy, so we will take that off. Does just happen as a natural part of the aging process with old pseudobulbs anyway. The plant kind of withdraws all the water and nutrients from the old bulb back into itself, and they just kind of dry up and go a little bit squishy, but it's the black squishiness or the very brown squishiness you want to watch for. So I've popped it in like that, and when new roots start to develop, I will transfer it to another container. So next one is the SLC Fire Fantasy hihimanu. And just one pseudobulb here. Very, very squashy old back bulb that's been... Oh, there you go. They weren't attached. It was two plants potentially put in together, and that one's not made it. So there you go. Common theme of the day, all the roots are dead. I don't really see any signs of hope for this one. It might surprise us, you never know. Next up, got the Cattleya Christian Starr tribute, and all of these are dead. All of these roots are dead. You're surprised, right? Okay, so I've taken all the dead roots off, which was all of the roots. Spray this down with hydrogen peroxide and have a little closer look at some of these. So that is where one of these bulbs tried a new growth and the new growth has died. Can't really do much about that. Take off some of these dried sheaths because this is the one that I found that had evidence of scale, although they were dead. Yeah, it also had, okay, this coming off, had some cobwebbing in here, but I've treated it with an insecticide. I've treated them all with insecticide. Okay, so I've taken off as much of the dried sheath as I can from that. The rhizome doesn't look amazing, but I'm gonna leave it and see how it goes. That's where the new growth has rotted. We're just gonna have to see if it spreads or not. That's the main thing. It could just dry up and be fine. Okay, so this one I said had the signs of dead scale on it. So can you see, I've peeled back the sheaths and there they are. And I've never really had an encounter with scale before. I believe that these are so I've noticed this when I've sprayed them with hydrogen peroxide. They are foaming a lot and they're not particularly happy looking. So I'm going to get the rubbing alcohol out and drench this plant in rubbing alcohol because that will kill scale. So drench my hands in rubbing alcohol. I mean, these scale are coming off. I don't know if that means they are alive or dead, and I'm not going to take any chances at all. So we are, which is why it's always worth, when you get a new plant, taking all of these sheaths off, because that's where they were sitting. They were just sitting under there, probably breeding. Rubbing alcohol will kill scale. There are also some insecticides, I believe, that will kill scale. What it might not kill is if they've laid eggs underneath where they've attached to the plant. Now, I'm not an expert in this at all. I've not really encountered scale very much. What I have encountered, I think, has been dead. But these are all kind of just coming off when I'm rubbing them. I know there are two different or several different types of scale. I couldn't tell you which ones these are, having never had scale for long enough to actually worry about it. See, the main thing we want from this one is that it doesn't transmit these scale into my collection. So I'm kind of drowning in rubbing alcohol right now, actually. So this one is going to sit on its own, and it's going to be sprayed regularly, I think, with either rubbing alcohol or an insecticide. Because I am not up for a scale outbreak. Just 2 more to go now, which I'm just going to zoom through quickly because they're not particularly interesting. This is the Vanda fetida, which apparently has a very nasty smell. So it's got no roots, and that one will go in a little cup, I believe, with a little bit of lacquer at the bottom. And that'll just keep the humidity up until it gets some roots, at which point I will probably transfer it into a slightly different setup with like a bark moss mix, if it's going to make it, because Vandas in my environment don't really like semi-hydro as a general rule. The other little one I've got is the Dendrobium spectabile, which doesn't really have any signs of new growth. So I think with this one, it's so tiny, I'm just going to pop it into that little pot with the Odontoglossum little communal moss pot. One thing I did notice while I was taking off the old leaves from the Vanda fetida was this little root nub here, which is quite exciting. So that's just starting to break through the outer leaves. We've also got this dried blackened root tip here, but it is still a little bit green at the top. And sometimes what Vandas can do is actually push through a new root tip from the old dried blackened one. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens here, but that is a good sign. Okay guys, so that is my 14 rescue orchids and my Cattleya dowiana Rosita all repotted into their rescue setups, or for the dowiana just the normal setup that I'll be keeping it in. And I will keep you updated on the progress for these guys. I'll probably do an update in about a month just to show you kind of the normal recovery process, unless something exciting happens sooner, which I kind of doubt. They need a little bit of time to settle back in. Thanks so much for watching today, and if you do have any questions, please leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer. If you enjoyed this video, then either give it a like or subscribe to my channel for more regular orchid updates, and I will see you guys later. Bye!